This is the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum's Zoom series, Trolleyology. My name is Kristen Fredrickson, and I am the coordinator of volunteers, public outreach, and programming at the museum. Thanks so much for joining us today. It is our first Trolleyology of 2021, and thanks to those who are back from previous Trolleyologies. Welcome back. Over the next few months, we are planning to show a program on Zoom once every 2 weeks or so. And these will feature Pennsylvania transit history topics or stories about our collection. And you can experience these all from the comfort of your home. And like I said, these should be about every 2 weeks. We've got our next one on January 26th, which you can already register for. And I can share the link on how to do that in the chat in just a few minutes. So I'll share it in the chat box and you can click directly on that and go to our website where you'll see all the upcoming programs, and we'll have registrations for those up soon. I am asking that everybody please turn off their videos today, just so we don't have any bandwidth issues, and so your videos don't cover up the screen. And I will come along and get those before Jack starts his presentation. But for now, I would like to introduce you to the museum. I know we have some folks who volunteer here and some people who have visited before, but for those who might be new to the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, we were established in 1954 as the Art and Electric Railway by a group of trolley enthusiasts called the Pittsburgh Electric Railway Club. The museum opened to visitors a few years later in 1963 and is actually located along the route of the trolley line between Pittsburgh and Washington, PA. You'll find almost 50 trolleys and electric railway cars here, about 20 of which operate. And there's about 30,000 visitors per year who take the 4-mile scenic ride at the museum. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce today's presenter, Jack Demian. Jack's great-grandparents frequently rode the Washington Interurban and first brought him to the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum when he was 4 or 5, and essentially he never left. He's been volunteering at the museum since middle school and has been a member since 1997. His primary volunteer focus is in operations and tour guiding, and he also serves as a museum trustee, and he's on several committees here. Father Jack was ordained a priest in June 2016 after graduating from St. Mary's Seminary and University in Baltimore with a Master of Divinity. He has served at St. Bernard Parish in Mount Lebanon, Our Lady of Lourdes Parish in Burgettstown, and he currently serves at Mary Mother of God Parish, which serves East McKeesport, White Oak, and the McKeesport communities. And I'll read you a little description of his presentation, which you guys probably saw when you registered. Most Pittsburgh Transit fans are familiar with the Jones low-floor car, that ubiquitous yellow car trolley, which was the mainstay vehicle for Pittsburgh Railways Company from the World War I era until the arrival of the PCC streamlined cars. Few, however, know much about the man behind the machine, Mr. P.N. Jones. This presentation will focus on his life and career with the railways while uncovering a few surprises along the way. At the end of the presentation, we will have a question and answer session with our presenter, but the chat box will be open throughout the presentation. So please feel free to enter questions or comments during the show. And I can, if those are relevant or if they have to do with the slide that we're on, I can definitely pop in and pose those to Jack. But I will invite everyone to unmute themselves at the end of the program as well. We can also turn our videos back on at the end of the show. All right. Without further ado, Jack, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. Let me just go ahead and transition over to my PowerPoint presentation. Okay. And then let me just turn off my own video so that way I don't see myself, and because I do have a face for radio. Okay, hold on one moment here. Okay, that's good. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much, Kristen. And I had to tell you, it's a real joy to be with all of you this evening. And not only is this my first Trolleyology presentation on Zoom, this is my first ever Trolleyology presentation for the museum. So I will definitely appreciate your feedback and your comments. And if you have any information yourself that might be relevant, that could help future audiences of this presentation, I would certainly be grateful for all of that at the end of the presentation. As we begin this presentation, I know that most of us are trolley fans, transit fans, and especially transit fans of the streetcar era here in Pittsburgh. But just for those who might not be as familiar, just a very brief introduction to those yellow cars or those low floor cars. And this is a picture of one such example of a low floor car. This is car 4814 up at the Spring Hill Loop. This is from a Charlie Dangler photo that I have in my collection. And again, this represents the mainstay vehicle for the Pittsburgh Railways Company, which was the streetcar operator here in the Pittsburgh area from 1902 to 1964. And so, as Kristen mentioned in the introduction, these were the mainstay vehicles essentially from the World War I era to the introduction of the PCC, the streamlined trolleys, which happens in 1936. And then the last of these low floor trolleys will be pulled from revenue service and in the mid 1950s. The last remnants were essentially performing shuttle service on these small lines that did not have loops at the end of the line. So again, just a very brief introduction to the low floor car, just in case you might not be familiar to as what we're going to be talking about this evening. Now, I'm going to begin this presentation with a bang. And for some of you, this might be the highlight of tonight's presentation. And if you like this picture, I encourage you to make a donation to the Trolley Museum. Right here I am. This is little Jack Demian when I'm about 7, 8 years old. And I'm standing in front of 3756, which is one of the 2 preserved low floor cars at the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum. And I'm sharing this picture not to simply go down memory lane with all of you this evening about my childhood, but really to highlight something here. And it's basically this, that from the time I started coming down with my great-grandparents to the museum to basically last April, last May, the only thing I really knew about the low floor car was the fact that it was designed by a gentleman by the name of Mr. P.N. Jones. And the only thing I really knew about P.N. Jones was the fact that he designed the low floor car. So like many throughout the world, I had a lot of free time with absolutely nothing to do because of the COVID restrictions. And so I used that free time as an opportunity to fill in some of the gaps that I had in my own collective knowledge of the streetcar era here in Pittsburgh. And certainly one of those gaps in my knowledge was, well, who is Mr. P.N. Jones? How did he come about designing this low floor car? Because, this seems like it's a common sense statement, but sometimes we can lose sight of the fact that all history at one point in time was current events. And just like the current events that we're going through today, none of these things happen in vacuums and nice, neat, tight little packages. There's all kind of influences. There's all kind of factors involved as history progresses in real time when it's a current event, as opposed to reading about it, 50, 100 years later. So that's how I'm going to approach this presentation tonight. First, who is Mr. P.N. Jones? Because what we'll see in a few moments is that his own educational and professional background will have a big influence to the design of the low floor car. And also then, what are the circumstances? What were the factors which led up to Mr. Jones sitting himself down at a table with a paper and pen and designing the low floor car? And so that is going to be the essence of tonight's program. I'm not going to talk too much about in terms of car assignments or which series of low floor cars went to this car house or that kind of things. A lot of that has been documented, so I'm not going to steal someone else's work, but this is going to be who is Mr. P.N. Jones and what were the circumstances which led him to design that famous yellow car trolley, which, by the way, as you see in the picture, they were painted orange, but some of them faded to like a yellow tint, which is why they were informally known as a yellow car. So let's begin at the beginning and let's put a face with a name. So this is Mr. P.N. Jones. So if you've ever wondered how he looked like, this is Mr. Jones right here. And this portrait was published in the Electric Railway Journal, which was a transit publication for the transit industry. and primarily the streetcar industry at this time. Volume 62 came out in 1923. Mr. Jones is born February 15th, 1865, near Springfield, Ohio. So for those of you who might not be familiar, I know the Cincinnati guys watching know where Springfield is, but Springfield's basically in between Columbus and Dayton, Ohio. You Buckeyes fans, you've had a rough week, but you'll be very pleased to know that Mr. Jones is a graduate of Ohio State. He graduates there in 1892 with degrees in electrical and mechanical engineering. So already we're seeing how his education is going to have some implications here to his work with streetcar designing. He marries a local gal, Nellie Schaefer, also of Springfield, around this time. They have 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters, Grace, Harriet, Charles, and Lawrence. And they will be married until his untimely death. It was untimely, it was very sudden, and we will talk about that in a few more moments. Now, after he graduates from Ohio State, he's a shop apprentice at the Short Electric Railway Company, Cleveland, which, despite that name, is not a streetcar operation. It was a manufacturer of electric traction motors. And not long after he takes up this apprenticeship, the Short Electric Railway Company is bought out by General Electric. And when that happens, PN will join this newly formed Lincoln Electric Company, and he's employed there in experimental work. So this is a new company with new products. So he's in this experimental testing department. Interestingly enough, of the businesses that PN Jones will work for, Lincoln Electric is the only one still left in business. And you see in the picture there on the bottom left-hand side, the sign to their headquarters, which is still in Ohio. So a neat connection here to the present. Now, he's not at Lincoln Electric all that long. In fact, May 1894, he joins the Westinghouse Electric and Manufacturing Company, also in their testing department. January 1st, 1903, he's promoted to sales manager of the Cleveland office for Westinghouse. And then just a few months later, on April 1st, 1903, he's promoted to sales manager of the Pittsburgh office. And when he receives this promotion, he will never leave Pittsburgh again. Pittsburgh will become his adoptive hometown. Now, the time frame that we're going to be really focusing on this evening is his time with the Pittsburgh Railways Company. And that begins October 1st, 1905, and he joins the company as their electrical and mechanical engineer. 1909, he's promoted to general superintendent, and then in 1912, he's promoted to general manager, and then also as the second vice president. He will retain his position as the GM until his death, and that even includes the 1918 bankruptcy reorganization, where the trustees will take over. The trustees will keep him as the number 2 man. So again, by 1918, he's proven his mettle as a general manager. He's proven his competency. And so these trustees who are appointed by the court have no problem with him staying on in upper management.
Jack, I got a question. What does
Yes.
PN stand for?
Well, just you will keep on watching this and you will find out. That's one of the surprises.
Ah, thank you.
Yes, yes. Speaking of surprises, this was a bit of a surprise. So in addition to his work with Pittsburgh Railways, he's involved in 2 other side businesses here in Pittsburgh. And so the first side business is this Pittsburgh Harness Supply Company. He's the vice president and director for this company. And here we see this 1908 ad from the Pittsburgh Daily Post. And this information I actually pulled from a digitized copy of the Directory of Directors. Now that's a name, if I ever heard one for a reference manual. Now, again, as a little bit of an anecdote here, again, making these different connections, the president of Pittsburgh Railways at this time is James Dawson Callery, J.D. Callery. And when J.D. Callery is not busy being the president of Pittsburgh Railways, his primary avocation is horse racing. So does it hurt or does it help PN Jones to be the VP of this Pittsburgh Harness Supply Company when the president of the streetcar company loves the horse race? So again, all of us have professional, personal relationships in life. It's also the case for Mr. Jones and his network as well. So I'm certain that it didn't hurt Mr. Jones to be involved in this business when Mr. Calorie loved to horse race. Now, the other side business was this Pittsburgh Manufacturers Distributing Company. He's also serving in the same capacity there as vice president and director of this company. And again, we see here on the right-hand side this 1913 ad featured in the Pittsburgh Gazette-Times. Now, as you would imagine, for someone who's involved in upper management, he's involved in several professional and civic associations, including the Engineers Society of Western Pennsylvania, the American Institute of Electrical Engineers, the American Electric Railroad Association, the Pennsylvania Railroad Association, and then also he was member of the Duquesne Club, which if you're so inclined to hear about this after the presentation, I have a pretty funny story about my one and so far only time having dinner at the Duquesne Club. Has nothing to do with P.N. Jones, but has something to do with streetcars. And we'll say that for afterwards if you want to hear it. He's also a Mason. He belongs to the Guthrie Lodge of the Free and Accepted Masons, number 691. And he, along with his wife, are parishioners at Christ Methodist Episcopal Church. He's also very much a civic-minded person. He was involved in several committees and served on the board of directors for other nonprofits. And two such examples of that was the fact that he served on this Greater Pittsburgh Day Committee for the 1908 sesquicentennial celebration of the founding of the city of Pittsburgh. And then at the time of his death, he also served as a director for the Pennsylvania Association of the Blind. Now, let's talk about his death. As I mentioned, it was untimely. It was very sudden. He passes away on July 1st, 1923 of a sudden heart attack. He's only 58 years old when he passes away. And now as a kid, 58 seems like that's old, but now that I'm a little bit older, I realize that 58, he was in the prime of his life. And he passes away at the Stevens House Hotel in Lancaster. And why Lancaster's? Well, because he, his wife, and daughter Harriet were just beginning a 3-week road trip vacation. And from what I was reading, the primary destination, the ultimate destination, was the White Mountains in New Hampshire. So again, this is years before any semblance of the interstate, pardon me, not internet, goodness sakes, interstate highway system. It's certainly before even the Pennsylvania Turnpike. So he more than likely was taking what we now know as Route 30, the Lincoln Highway, over on this road trip. And again, it felt, he becomes ill and suffers this massive heart attack when he passes away. And so we see this, not only the Lancaster, but also the Pittsburgh press featuring and making that announcement that Mr. Jones has passed away. Now, one of the things that I learned from reading his obituary, that he was buried in Allegheny Cemetery. And for those of you who might not be familiar with the Pittsburgh area, Allegheny Cemetery is one of those grand old park-like cemeteries. It goes back many, many years to the 1850s. It's famous for all the notables and the who's who that are buried in the cemetery. So as a consequence of that, they actually have their own search engine on their website. And you punch in the information of the individual that you're looking for his or her grave, and actually power through Google Maps. It will take you right to that grave site, because you do not want to just find the name and then try to look amongst the tombstones. You will be there for weeks. It's a very large cemetery. So at this point, what I know is that his first initials P, last name Jones, and his year of death is 1923. And this is what pops up as the one and only search result from Allegheny Cemetery. And when I see this, Pearl N. Jones, I thought this must be a mistake. This is either a typo in the record, or this is some poor unfortunate woman who has the misfortune of having the same initials and dying in the same year as Mr. Jones. I thought, for someone to be born in 1865 and the parents are going to name their son Pearl in 1865, just, give me a break. I just refuse to believe this. So I thought, well, how am I going to verify his name then? Then I remember, well, you have to use your full name on legal documents, especially your vital records, your birth certificate, death certificate. So I couldn't find his birth certificate, but what I did find, courtesy of Ancestry.com, was his death certificate. And this is his death certificate here. And reading through it, I realized that all this information I learned from the obituaries and from these memorials that were published at the time of his death, and even including the Allegheny Cemetery search result, everything fell into place. So let's just zoom in here for a second here for those who might be viewing this on a smaller screen. So we see Pearl N. Jones passes away in Lancaster at the Stevens house. And what is Pearl N. Jones's occupation on the death certificate? Trolley manager. So for the person who asked Mr. P. N. Jones, his name was Pearl N. Jones. I don't know. I couldn't find out what the middle initial is, but if you look back, his mother's name is Nancy. So is it possible that it's Pearl Nancy Jones? I don't know, but at least we now know why he went by P. N. Jones. So if you go today to Allegheny Cemetery, this is the Jones family plot. He's buried next to his wife with their children and their spouses. And if you go up to Mr. Jones's tombstone, headstone, it's even on the tombstone, it's P. N. Jones. He really did not want people to know that his first name was Pearl. So out of respect for that, throughout this presentation, I will still refer to him as PN or Mr. Jones. But I will say this, that finding out that his first name is Pearl was very helpful uncovering other legal documents, such as his patents. And I'll show you some of those patents here in a few more moments. So now this is basically a brief biographical sketch of Mr. Jones, just to give you an idea of who he was, the time that he lived in, the time frame, his professional educational background. So let's focus now really on his time as general superintendent and as general manager for the Pittsburgh Railways Company. And reading the articles of the day, it was obvious, and I saw this trend of Mr. Jones being the general manager. He's going to do what I call the trolley juggle. And this is basically a balancing act between these four categories, these four realities that he's going to have to contend with as being the person who's in charge of day-to-day operations of the streetcar company. So the first category is the streetcar company itself, Pittsburgh Railways Company. He's going to have to be a good general manager, operate a system that is safe, profitable, because like 98% of the rest of the systems at the time, it's a private for-profit business. He has to get along with the management under him. He has to get along well with the president and the board of directors. So he has to be a good general manager in that sense. He's also going to have to contend with the labor. And by labor, I mean organized labor. This whole topic could be worthy of its own presentation. It was some really wild stuff I uncovered during this time about labor relations, or really I should say the lack thereof. I mean, there were some streetcars getting blown up, line side poles being sawed off. It was really a very contentious, interesting time, to say the least, in this era, as the labor unions were on the rise. He also is going to have to deal with the public. And by that, I mean the riding public, because ultimately you need to have a satisfied riding public to continue to ride your streetcars to get around town. Because if they stop riding your streetcars to get around town and find other ways, that's a big problem. And in a nutshell, isn't that how the streetcar era ended after all? So he has to be aware of that. He also has to be aware of the fact that, he also needs a great non-tangible benefit from the public, and that's the public goodwill. And we'll see how he operates in that sphere. And then finally, but certainly not the least, the government. This is, when he's general superintendent, general manager, in the broader American history, this is the rise of the progressive era in political history. And so, especially if you have local governments, a mayor that's progressive, they're going to put the squeeze on the public utilities to make sure that they're operating for the public's best interest and not simply for their own shareholders. So each four of these categories, in their own way, directly or indirectly, they're going to impact how Mr. Jones comes up with the low floor car and help shape how this design comes about. So let's just give a brief example in each of these categories, how these four categories are going to have an impact in his development. So for example, for being a good general manager, backing up President Calorie, working for the company's best interest. One example that I saw throughout, it comes to a head twice, in 1912 and then later on, actually in 1922, is what I term, this is my own term, I call it the rate war between the Pittsburgh Railways Company and then several other electric companies, light companies. But in 1912 in particular, Allegheny County Light Company, J.D. Calorie is negotiating a contract between the Railways Company and Allegheny County Light at this time. They will sign a contract in 1913, but in 1912, he's trying to negotiate a good rate. And so he gets P.N. Jones, with his electrical engineering background, to do a report about how much electricity they used versus how much they paid for it. And what P.N. Jones has kept track of over a 7-year period is the fact that the Allegheny County Light's Rankin Powerhouse, Pittsburgh Railways has purchased 63% of the output from this powerhouse for basically a sum total of $1.5 million. And that's the actual amount. I did not change that for inflation over the years. That's an actual $12. Meanwhile, P.N. Jones finds out that 100%, so all of the output of this powerhouse, would have only cost the Allegheny County Light Company just north of $1 million. So he's not happy with this fact that they're getting a bum deal with the electric company over this rate per kilowatt hour. And you think about it, this is not a good time to have this kind of rates, because the streetcar company is expanding. They just built the interurbans. There's now trolley freight. Even the city service is expanding. So this is not a good time to be dealing with a high electric bill. No one likes a high electric bill, especially if you're going to be a streetcar company. So, you may ask yourself, well, why is Allegheny County Light doing this? Well, it's because they can, is basically the answer. And part of that lies in the fact that Allegheny County Light, its parent company, is also the streetcar company's parent company, which is called the Philadelphia Company, for those who might not be familiar with that. And basically, as long as Philadelphia Company at the end of the day is getting their own take of the profit, they don't really care if Peter's robbing Paul for that share. So if you're P.N. Jones, what are you going to do on your end to try to reduce the power consumption when your streetcar company is in this expansion mode? And so again, this is going to be a constant thing that Mr. Jones is always going to be agitated about, because even in 1922, his last year alive here, and also his last full year as general manager, he's also doing the same thing with Duquesne Light at that time. He's not happy about the fact that on average, Pittsburgh Railways is paying more for their electricity than the other transit systems in America. So again, on your end, what can you do? And one of those solutions is going to be a term that we have now, but we could apply back then, is basically energy efficiency. Now, again, in terms of the labor situation, very contentious. This is the rise of the Local 85 of the Amalgamated Association of Street Railway Employees of America. And the Local 85 is still around. It's now the ATU. But in this time, it's great labor unrest, many strikes. Some were violent. All of them were contentious. Very little leeway, little compromise from labor and management. They really duke it out in more ways than one. And as you might expect, your basic issues are going to be wages, hours worked per week, workplace conditions. Well, one such example is 1909, there's a strike. Just as Mr. Jones is climbing the corporate ladder, there's a strike that the Local 85 calls in response to a fired employee. This person is then rehired, but then without a seniority, which the Local 85 finds unacceptable. So they call a strike. And so when this strike happens, it then morphs into a series of all kind of other grievances that they've had, and they take it to the press. They even try to take it to J.D. Calorie. Every time they try to go to President Calorie, conveniently enough, he's away from his office that day. So Mr. Jones has to deal with these upset labor leaders. So one of these grievances, interestingly enough, during this 1909 strike is the motormen are not happy that they don't have a stool to sit on while they're working their shifts. It's basically the response from Pittsburgh Railways was no stool for you. Okay, they were not budging. They didn't want to hear it. So this strike ends in arbitration. And as arbitration goes, neither side is completely happy with the result. But again, keep this in the back of your mind, because if P.A. Jones is thinking about workplace conditions, if you can design a car that's going to be now energy efficient, but also can improve the workplace conditions to your operating crew, your motormen and conductors, maybe they might be less prone to strike the next time there's a grievance. So again, keep this in the back of your mind as we're discussing these examples. Now, the writing public. Now, beyond his expertise as an engineer, this is really one of the areas that P.A. Jones really shines. He has a keen understanding that if you're going to be in the public utility business, and not only do you need to have a satisfied writing public to again keep those fares coming, but to have public goodwill on your side is a great non-tangible asset. And if you have the public goodwill on your side, it enables you to leverage that in all kind of ways, especially if you have competition from the other categories. If the public goodwill is on your side, sometimes that's all you need to take you where you want to go as a company. So one great example how he leverages public goodwill is this battle royale that he has with the Carrick Council over the construction of the new Carrick Car House in 1916. And just to be clear, Carrick at this time was not a part of the city of Pittsburgh. It was its own standalone municipality. So P.A. Jones, again, they want to build this car house. They have the franchise, they have the land, they have the permits. Everything is legal, but essentially the Carrick Council is full of what we would call NIMBYs. They didn't want this car house to be built. They thought it would devalue property and make it less of an attractive neighborhood. So P.A. Jones shows up with his track crew to lay in these switches on Brownsville Road to this proposed Carrick Car House location. And what happens is that the Carrick Council literally shows up with the sheriff and surrounds them and says, you're not going to move, put these switches in Brownsville Road over our dead bodies. So P.A. Jones sends the workers away. He's not going to fight them in the street. But what he does was a really genius move on his part. He sends up a low floor car, which at this point it was a brand new vehicle. So we see in the Pittsburgh Gazette-Times what happens. He goes, to demonstrate how the borough citizens will benefit by the new steel streetcars if a barn is erected, the Railways Company operated one of the latest type streetcars through Carrick yesterday afternoon, free of charge. So again, citizens of Carrick, do you like this bright new shiny streetcar? Do you like all the latest features? Do you like that it's bigger and has more seats for you to sit on? Do you like the fact that the doors are closer to the ground to get on and get off it faster? You do? Well, you could have a lot more of these cars, but you just need to tell Carrick Council to lay off of us and get this car house built so you can ride these nice new shiny cars every day instead of this being a special event. And it works because the Carrick Car House, as most Pittsburgh transit historians know, was built off of Brownsville Road. Now, I also include this headline from the Daily Post, also recounting this situation. I include it because other than that portrait that we saw in the obituary and in the Electric Railway Journal, this is the only published photograph of P.A. Jones that I've seen. And again, the back of my mind, if you saw Mr. Jones and he looks like that walking down the street, I would not call him Pearl, okay? It's Mr. Jones as far as I'm concerned. And then on the right-hand side, that's Dr. A.J. Helpt, who is the president of the Carrick Council. Now, speaking of the government, this is going to be perhaps above and beyond the other categories. This is going to be one of the biggest influencing factors into the development of the new equipment. And at this time, the Pittsburgh mayor is Mayor William Mcgee. So if you ever heard of Mcgee's Hospital, this is the namesake, William Mcgee. And William Mcgee is a progressive city mayor. His whole idea is to make Pittsburgh a great and beautiful place to live and work in and even play in, because one of Mayor Mcgee's primary landmarks was Forbes Field. Forbes Field, he was one of the biggest promoters of building it. He was the mayor who tosses out that ceremonial first pitch at Forbes Field. And so he's a great fan of the Pirates, great fan of baseball, but he's not a great fan of the Pittsburgh Railways Company. He's going to be the streetcar company's biggest thorn in their side while he's in office. And so one of the things that he's really going to take them to task on is basically service and the overcrowding of their streetcars. Because at this point, the streetcar company is still using a lot of single truck streetcars, a lot of older type streetcars that they even inherited from these other smaller companies that they absorbed. So this is going to be Mayor Mcgee's one of his biggest battle royales with the streetcar company. And it comes to a head in 1909. There's this protracted arbitration. This Railroad Commission is set up to hear Mayor Mcgee's demands, and the Pittsburgh Railways Company has an opportunity to respond. And December 2nd, 1909, as we see in the Pittsburgh Daily Post, this commission stops the hearing, stops the testimony giving, and hands down gives Mayor Mcgee a victory. Mayor Mcgee gets everything that he wanted, and Pittsburgh Railways walks away empty-handed with probably nothing but regret at this point, okay? And so now this commission has ruled in favor of Mayor Mcgee, so now the onus is on the Pittsburgh Railways Company to increase service, to have better service, and also overcrowding. And one of the quotes from this article, you can almost understand why this commission sides with Mayor Mcgee, because this is really just a very interesting quote here. When attorney J.C. Gray for the Pittsburgh Railways Company attempted to distinguish overcrowding from greatly overcrowding, City Solicitor C.A. O'Brien offered to prove that the cars were not only greatly overcrowded, but indecently overcrowded and a menace to the health and safety of the community. So, personally, I would like to know, what is the difference between overcrowding and greatly overcrowding? I don't think the city solicitor knew that as well. But again, when the city solicitor frames the argument in terms of public health and safety, just as it is today, I'm sure it was back then, that's going to be very difficult to punch out a counter argument. So all this is happening. The squeeze is on the streetcar company with the government. You need to have to continue to foster public goodwill, try to find ways to increase and improve workplace conditions for at least for your operating crew. And you also have to find a way to somehow mitigate those increasing high electric bills. So what is P.N. Jones's solution to this? New streetcars, new equipment. And the beginning of this quest for new equipment and to satisfy these different demands from these categories is going to be what we would now call the high floor car. And so this is a patent of Mr. Jones. And for us Trolley Museum folks, Pennsylvania Trolley Museum folks, this diagram, this chart should look somewhat familiar to us, because you see the front platform there of these new high floor cars that he's designing, and then you see the rear platform. And this is basically the genesis of the 4000 series high floor cars. So this is designed by Mr. Jones, and the high floor cars are going to be improving the quality of service by improving capacity, improving speeds, all those things that Mayor Mcgee was on their back about. And one of the ways that he improves the speed of the service is that people enter in the rear and then exit through the front. So again, this is a great article from 1910 introducing the fact that these new 4000 series cars are going to be on the way very soon. And it's just how it's worded and framed. If we see Mr. Jones as a political operative, he's trying to generate public goodwill, to have the public on his side. So we see this quote from the Daily Republican here. Superintendent P.N. Jones is responsible for the arrival of the car sooner than might otherwise been the case. He just sat down and wrote the J.G. Brill Company that he did not care whether there was a strike in that plant or not, that he just must have more cars. That's what he did, honestly. And then the article goes on to say, furthermore, Jones is ready to hear complaints about the present deplorable service. Now, is it really the case that J.G. Brill Company over in Philadelphia turned up the heat to get these cars built and delivered to Pittsburgh Railways because P.N. Jones sent them a nasty gram? Uh, I don't really know, but that doesn't matter. What matters is the fact that the reporter at the Daily Republican thinks that's what happened. And so therefore, the public reading this article will think this is what's going on. And again, Mr. Jones, he wants to hear you out. He wants to talk with you. He wants to make this transit service attractive to you and your family and friends. So again, Mr. Jones is a great political operative when it comes to generating public goodwill. And the fact remains is that, today, every so often you'll see articles about Port Authority or so, but let me tell you, I mean, Mr. Jones was frequently quoted in these newspapers. I mean, he was certainly a figure at this time, which just goes to show you how important transit was and even the general mindset of the people. So one of the things, and by the way, the 4,000 cars, let me just back up 1 second. The 4,000 cars are delivered and they will operate beginning in 1910. Now, one of the things that we're going to see is that P.N. Jones never rests on his laurels when it comes to design works. He's always constantly improving, testing things out. If it looks good on paper but doesn't work in reality, he's willing to nix it and try something else. And so what we see is 1910, the 4,000 series high floor car comes out, and the following year, the 4,100 high floor comes out. And this is an improvement. P.N. Jones will improve the 4,000 series high floor car to this new 4,100. So some of the things that he does, well, again, that back platform, he extends it. He takes out a couple of the back seats, extends the back platform so that way there's more doors, a bigger area for people to climb on board. And believe it or not, the 4,100 actually sits a few inches closer to the ground than the 4,000. So we're already seeing a premonition of things to come. So again, this is 1911. So only a year after these new streetcars are out, P.N. Jones is ready to unveil the 4,100 high floor cars. And this quote I'm going to show you is a great story about how 4,100 making its trial run on the system inadvertently encounters a bit of a clearance issue, and we'll see the resolution of this issue. Some real labor was performed by the officials on the trial trip of the car. The sharpest curve on the system is the loop at the end of the Carnegie line. A porch stood in the way. The officials valiantly tackled the porch. After a time, it succumbed, and the car passed only to run into another obstruction in the way of an outhouse. It was P.N. Jones and M.J. Maxwell, superintendent of transportation, to the rescue. While a large part of Carnegie stood looking on in wonderment, Mr. Maxwell sawed and Mr. Jones hammered that outhouse in two and made room for the car to pass. So can you imagine in your mind's eye seeing P.N. Jones and this M.J. Maxwell in their three-piece suits and their watch fobs and wearing their hats, hacking away at an outhouse in Carnegie so that this longer, wider car can pass through the loop? I just, again, my imagination ran wild there. And I thought if I had a time machine, this would be a moment in time I'd go back and take a picture of, because that had been humorous to have witnessed. The other little quote from this article is also a sign of things to come and may explain as to why we see some of the seats being designed the way they are on 4145 and our own low floor cars preserved at the museum. Because the seats are the same character as the old, and by old, they're talking about the 4,000 series cars, which were only a year old at this time. So I thought that was kind of humorous, with the exception that the long side seat is concave instead of convex. thus preventing a passenger from slipping when rounding curves. So if you ever sat in those longitudinal seats on 41, 45, and the low floor cars that have that dip in the middle, I find them to be uncomfortable every so often. Well, now we know why there is a dip, because evidently the 4000 series cars had regular style seating, and people were slipping around and spilling their groceries and whatever else. And so they put that dip there to keep you secure. So both of these quotes and that headline that we see here is from the Pittsburgh Daily Post, the September 18th, 1911 edition. And some of us may know that the 4100s did come out in 1911. They were built by the Press Steel Car Company right here in Mcgee's Rocks, which is right down the road from Pittsburgh. So this may be a surprise to some of us at the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, but how many trolleys does PTM have in its collection, which were designed by P.N. Jones? And the answer is not two. I always thought for many years that the answer is two, but no, it's the low floor cars plus 4145, and actually plus M200, which began as a 4500 series high floor car. So if someone's out there right now watching this and knows what the original number of M200 was, I'd love to know that, because I personally don't know that myself. But we have 4 P.N. Jones streetcars here at the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum. Now, at the same time that he's designing designing these high floor cars, he's also going to be looking at new trailers for these high floor cars to pull. And the reason why is this, is that looking through some of the reports and some of these papers that he will deliver to transit commissions and other transit officials and manufacturers of trolleys, he's convinced, based on his own expertise, that the most economic way to improve capacity and service on your busiest routes is by taking a motorized streetcar, preferably with 4 motors, so a motor on each axle, pulling an unmotorized streetcar or unmotorized trailer car. And so that is what he's doing at the same time as he's designing these high floor cars. He's designing this trailer car. And now some of you may know this. This may be a surprise to some others, that the genesis of the low floor streetcar were these low floor trailer cars. And we see his patent here for the actual car body itself. And again, he's constantly improving. He's constantly reworking his design. So even what we see in the patent doesn't look quite like what is ultimately built. But this is the genesis. This is the beginning of these low floor trailers. And again, why the low floor trailers? Well, it's because it's economical. It's saving energy. Saving power, that is, saving current. You're also saving the wages that you would have to pay for another motorman at this time, and you're also increasing capacity. So your passenger revenue per mile increases as well. So it's a win-win situation. Now, these are built and introduced in 1910. And by the way, I have to say, the Daily Post, I don't know if their reporter covering the transit scene or the transportation scene was a streetcar fan, but out of all the Pittsburgh papers, the Daily Post seemed to really go into detail that none of the other papers did. So I'm inclined to believe that the Pittsburgh Daily Post reporter was something of a streetcar fan, because he really had some great quotes that we're going to use for the rest of the presentation. So, for example, here's a headline indicating when the first of these low floor trailers are being placed into service. We have a photograph here that's published of the interior, and we see, as recounted in this article, that the first center entrance trailer steel streetcar ever operated in the United States was placed in service on the Frankstown line yesterday afternoon by the Pittsburgh Railways Company. Then the article goes on to say 49 other cars are being completed in the plants of the Standard Steel Car Company in Newcastle. And this is from the November 23rd, 1910 Pittsburgh Daily Post. So if you ever want to know the exact date when the first of these low floor car trailers came out, we can thank our friends at the Daily Post. It was November 22nd, 1910. So again, Now, P.N. Jones, people are very happy. They're satisfied with this trailer. In fact, the riding public seems to even prefer riding in the trailer versus riding up front in the high floor car. So P.N. Jones, again, not resting on his laurels, is there a way we can take this low floor trailer and add some motors and make this a freestanding operating motorized streetcar? So again, just briefly, this is how a high floor car pulling a low floor trailer would look like. This is from the July 25th, 1911 special edition. And again, this would have been the latest and the greatest in 1911. So now you have a motor, pardon me, now you have a trailer, or in terms of this low floor trailer, the car body. And so now P.N. Jones is going to go to his old colleagues at Westinghouse and ask them to design a motor that's small enough for the low floor trucks. These trucks are much smaller than your standard streetcar trucks of the time. And is there a way his old friends at Westinghouse can come up with this motor to accommodate those smaller trucks, those smaller wheels, but also yet powerful enough to power the streetcar up and down Pittsburgh's city hills? And what we hear from a 1923 promotional piece by Westinghouse is that the Westinghouse company responded to the appeals of the late P.N. Jones. So this promotional piece was obviously sometime after July 1923 of the Pittsburgh Railways, and collaborating with him, developed the first low floor car motor for 24-inch wheels. This was the number 328, and it was called the baby motor. This name was applied because it was the birth of a new idea and a real achievement. And what we see is up in the top quadrant, an illustration of the number 328, that baby motor that Westinghouse designs for P.N. Jones and Pittsburgh Railways. Now, in the history field, there's this great buzzword right now called memory. And what that means is that you have something that happens in history, the actual date or the name of the person, those kind of things that you memorize to pass history tests in school. But then you have the memory, and the memory is how something is basically remembered, interpreted. And sometimes that can change over time and over the years. So what I'm going to show you now is a great example of how the memory kind of skews a bit here. So again, Westinghouse, this is the promotional piece from 1923 that we're seeing. The Daily Post, as these new motorized low floor cars come out, tell us this: the idea was conceived to reduce the weight of the motors in the trucks, but because of the skepticism of the electrical manufacturers, the Pittsburgh Railways Company agreed to pay the development cost. So Westinghouse, P.N. Jones didn't go up to Westinghouse and say, this is the birth of a new idea and a real achievement. Shush, boom, bah, we're on the march for progress. They said, P.N., we like you. Yes, this may work, but show us the money before we create this, because we don't know if this is going to work or not. And to the streetcar company's credit, they fronted the money, which to me, isn't that a testament to the faith, the level of faith that they have in P.N. Jones, his competency as an engineer, that he's going to go to President Callery, going to go to the board and say, look, I think it can be done. In my opinion, it's possible. And here's the reason why. And they front the money. If Pittsburgh Railways said, P.N., that's great, but we're not interested, this whole thing could have collapsed so easily. And the streetcar era in Pittsburgh might have looked very, very different had they not said, okay, Mr. Jones, we believe you, here's the money, and run with it. So again, these interpersonal connections, everything happens that is related to each other. Nothing happens in a vacuum. Now, what we see also is General Electric also produced a version of these low floor car motors. And what we see in that bottom quadrant there is actually a General Electric version of this, with also a fan that Westinghouse will also include in their later reworking of the low floor car motor to keep the motor cool and keep it efficient. So at this point, we have the actual low floor car body, the trucks, we have the motors. So now what we need is a way to power the motors, and Mr. Jones will patent a controller system. And this controller system, I am not an electrical engineer. I won't even try to pretend to be one on Trolleyology tonight. So in very layman's term, based on what I could read through the patent, is that this new control system was a way to reduce the points of resistance and actually increase the running points. So that way, there's less likelihood of your motormen dwelling on those points of resistance and literally burning away all this electricity that you're paying an arm and a leg for from these light companies. And so actually, if you look at the schematic here, you see that there's actually 3 running points on these original controls that Mr. Jones will design for these low floor cars. So the 2nd, 4th, and 7th points are actually running points for the car. And this is also another schematic from this patent. Again, I'm not even going to pretend to interpret this for you. This is all Greek to me, and I even had some Greek in seminary, so I will just let the experts decipher this. Now, again, not resting on his laurels, he will then patent another control system in 1915, which will be an improvement to this control system that he comes up with. So now we have the complete package. We have the body, the trucks, the motors, and also the control system. And so again, our friends at the Daily Post publishes this great article indicating that these new motorized low floor cars are now a reality. And so we see, again, this quote from the Pittsburgh Daily Post. The first trip of the new type of streetcar was made from the Homewood Barns to East Pittsburgh. P.N. Jones, advertising manager Johnny McCurdy, and other railway officials and newspapermen made the trial trip. The car successfully tried out yesterday resembles the trailer in use on the Forbes Street lines. And this is from the July 8th, 1912 Daily Post. So if you wanted to know the exact date that the very first prototype motorized low floor car ran in Pittsburgh, now we know the date, July 7th, 1912. So mark that on your calendars, okay? You can celebrate every July 7th every year about the introduction of these motorized low floor cars. And we see a picture published in this article of the interior. And again, P.N. Jones, he doesn't have an ego that is fragile. If something doesn't work, it doesn't work. And one of the things that maybe looked good on paper, but I'm sure in reality was an absolute headache, were these seats in the center aisles. You see the one here in the foreground. There's also one in the back. Those were not in the low floor trailer cars, and in the subsequent orders of the low floor motorized cars, they're not there. So these did a quick disappearing act. Again, something that more than likely looked good on paper, but in practice was probably an absolute nightmare to get around, and just standing on top of someone was just not a good thing. Now, I don't want to belabor this point because I want to keep the presentation moving, but one of those ideas that P.N. Jones comes up with that was not quite as successful was also the double deck cars that people seem to be fascinated with. The small number of them in the 6,000 series, they were numbered. Those are actually also patented by Mr. P.N. Jones, and he designed them. Again, not quite as successful, something that in theory was a good idea. In practice, there was all kind of issues beyond that initial handful of them. None of them, they were not built in the way that the low floor cars were built and ordered for the company. And let's look at the timeline here. 1923, Mr. Jones passes away. 1924, the double deck cars are removed from service and scrapped. So again, not saying the one is connected to the other, but the timing does seem rather impeccable to me. So again, these center seats and the double deckers, probably not the greatest things Mr. Jones has come up with, but at least he gave it the attempt, and at least he's willing to improve and make adjustments as these cars are put into service. So the center seats notwithstanding, overall, the low floor car was a very successful test run with these prototypes. And so in 1913, Pittsburgh Railways is going to place its first order for these low floor cars, the 4200s, and they will be delivered in 1914. And so here's a copy slide that I have of a much older picture, obviously, of one of those 4200 series cars along Carson Street in the south side of Pittsburgh. And you see it has the Eclipse fender. It's even painted in maroon. Ironically enough, we talked about the Carrick brouhaha. It's actually going up to Carrick. I just noticed that. And then for us Trolley fans too, this is really a great picture because it's the old and the new at the time. And you see, of course, the Sarah Street horse car line, which was the last operating horse car line. And they're waiting for the low floor car to pass there. So again, 4200 series, the first major order of these low floor cars delivered in 1914. Now, they're on this system for about a year. And at this point, the Pittsburgh Race Company, after a year of them being in service on the street, doing their job day in, day out successfully, the streetcar company decides this is the time to go all in with the low floor car. And so at the end of 1915, again, our friends at the Daily Post makes the announcement on behalf of Pittsburgh Railways that James D. Callery, the president, and P.N. Jones yesterday awarded contracts for 190 steel cars involving an outlay of $1.1 million. These cars will be completed next spring and summer. These contracts placed include 75 all-steel low-floor motor cars awarded to the Cincinnati Car Company, so shout out to our Cincinnati friends watching, 50 to the St. Louis Car Company, 50 trailer cars awarded to the St. Louis Car Company, 15 all-steel interurban cars to the J.G. Brill Company of Philadelphia. And then the article will then go on later to say that the steel interurban cars will use the low-floor principle, which has been so successful on the city cars. So again, what we're seeing here is the beginning of the culmination of the 4200 series cars, and then transitioning now to the 4300 series cars. And then also this article talks about the steel interurban cars. Well, what cars are they talking about? They're talking about what we now know as the 3700 interurban cars, which were built by Brill, and they were delivered in 1916. And here's an example of one at the Tunnel Car House. And if you look at it, really, with the exception of the roof line, it's basically a beefed up low floor car designed for higher speed interurban service. So, a credit to this low floor principle is that by all accounts, they were very successful interurban cars, which they themselves would be replaced by the PCC, just like the low floor city cars. And then again, at this point, Pittsburgh Railways is going to go all in with the low floor car. Finally, the last of these low floor cars will be built in between 1926 and 1927, and those were the 5500 series low floor cars. So again, put that date within the broader context of trolley design and development. By 1927, there was a lot more modern looking cars out there, other than this 1912 design by Mr. Jones. But this car was such a successful, well-built, well-designed car. Basically don't mess with perfection was their mantra. And other than the 3800 series interurban cars that came out in 1928, and then other than those experimental cars from Osgood Bradley, this is going to be it. This is how Pittsburghers are going to get around town until the introduction of those PCC streamlined cars in the late 30s. Now, I don't unfortunately have a picture of a 5500 series car in my collection, but I do have the penultimate series for the city cars, which were the 5400s, which were built in 1924. And what we see here is 5445 at the old Castle Shannon Administration building, picking up some passengers there. So just as a bit of a conclusion to this presentation, beyond streetcar design, Mr. Jones is also responsible for designing the very first fare token for the Pittsburgh Railways Company in 1919. So I'm sure some of you might have this token in their collection, or at least has seen this. So again, a great way to increase service, increase efficiency. It makes the life of your conductors easier if they just worry about tokens as opposed to cold hard cash and making change. It makes the fare collection process obviously easier for the people as well. So it's a win-win situation. Again, there'll be later designs, but a surprise to me was the fact that he designed the very first fair token here in Pittsburgh as well. And I just, again, does the P stand for Pittsburgh or Pearl? That is, in my opinion, that's the biggest surprise. The man's name is Pearl. I'm still not over that. But anyways, so again, that's also a little something here too, that if you're going to study Pittsburgh Railways Company, if you're going to study Pittsburgh transit history, you have to learn about Mr. P.N. Jones. He was just that influential and that monumental in our history, that here he was right here in Pittsburgh. He designed the very first low floor car with accessibility in mind, and he tried to make it energy efficient and a better car for the people and his crew. That legacy continues on today, and this is just going to be my final thoughts on it. You look at modern low floor streetcars now, they're building on those principles that Mr. Jones came up and successfully designed back in 1910 and 1912. You know, for example, these are the new streetcars up in Toronto for the TTC Commission, and they certainly increase capacity, that's for sure. They're almost Caterpillar-like how long they are. And some of us watching this, like myself, we have friends who operate for the TTC, and one particular friend of mine love operating these new cars. Now, as much as I love the old CLRVs and the PCCs, you know, some of these operators love the new ones because it's a much more comfortable cab, operator's cab for them. And again, is this a worldwide? This is a picture I took in Berlin a couple years ago. Again, using that low floor car principle, which was successfully designed and built right here in Pittsburgh in Mr. P.N. Jones. So we have a lot to be proud of in the way of Mr. Jones and his involvement with the Pittsburgh Railways Company. So at this point, I'm going to shut up because I did enough talking for one evening, and I will be glad to talk with all of you. And I will hand this back over to Kristen, and I will now stop sharing my screen. Oh, Kristen did that. Okay. Even better.
Yes. And if you'd like to type in a question in the chat box, you can go ahead and do that now. But in just a minute, I'm going to invite everyone to unmute themselves. You can go ahead and turn on your video. But while I have you here, I did want to let everybody know what's coming up virtually here at the museum. Like I mentioned earlier, we've got a new Trolleyology roughly every 2 weeks. We are currently closed to the public over the winter, but this is a fun way to interact with everybody while we're doing things like replacing ties and training new operators and getting ready for the upcoming season. So in 2 weeks, on Tuesday, January 26th, we'll have PCC, the amazing streamlined streetcar. So kind of an evolution following the high floor and low floor by Tony Schill, who's one of our members and operators. And then in February, we will have a presentation on Hershey Transit and the Red Arrow lines. And we've got things scheduled through March and maybe even April. And if anybody here is interested in presenting a show or even some footage that you have, please feel free to reach out to me. You can find my email address in your confirmation email that you got today for this program. It's assistant@patrolley.org. So I am gonna unmute or allow everybody to unmute. One last thing. I want to thank everybody who attempted to donate today. We do have our glitch fixed now. I know several of you attempted to donate while you were registering today. Unfortunately, it wasn't fixed until this afternoon, but for future programs, if you'd like to make a donation, you can do that upon registration, or you can visit patrolley.org/support and make a donation there as well. We truly appreciate everybody who did donate today and who tried to donate as well. And again, that should be fixed now. It looks like we've got some comments coming in the chat, and let me get everybody the ability to unmute. Okay, and everyone should have the ability to speak up if you have a question or if you have a comment for Jack. We're getting some great feedback here, Jack.
Yes, thanks. Actually, I did see one question, not trolley related, but yes, there is an A in Bernard that was named after Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. Someone asked about Saint Bernard in Mount Lebanon. So mostly everybody would call him Saint Bernard, but as we say, that is the dog. If you want the saint the person, it's Saint Bernard. Just like we say Saint Augustine, not Saint Augustine. Why? Because we just have to be different, I guess. So,
Yeah, American way.
Jack, this is Scott Becker. Do you know how much they paid Westinghouse to develop the motors?
Scott, great question. I would love to know that myself. It definitely seemed to be a significant amount based on what I was reading contextually, but that's a great question, and I would love to know that answer myself. But they did, maybe somewhere in the archives, if I could get some access to them, once we're situated there, maybe it might be in some corporate record or board meeting.
Hi, Jack. This is Bill Franchek calling, and I just want to let you know that I have a book here that was owned by P.N. Jones.
Oh, fantastic. Wow.
It's an Ohio Brass catalog of overhead line hardware from their catalog of 1912, and it's signed by him, P.N. Jones, General Superintendent.
Great.
And I got it from Harry Bartley years and years and years ago. So
Great.
it'll show up at the archives one of these days, whenever the archives is free and ready to receive new donations.
That's fantastic. You know, it's true. 6 degrees of separation, right, Dr. Bill? I mean, that's great. That's fantastic.
We did get a request to tell the Duquesne Club story.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, the Duquesne Club story. So this is funny. So this was about 10, 11 years ago now, and I was in the seminary, so I was in school. And through a mutual friend, I made the acquaintance of a Mr. Bill Milburn. And Mr. Milburn was just a wonderful man. He was a vice president of Mellon Bank, very active in the church. He was a World War II vet. He was a tank commander in the North African campaign. I mean, he had some incredible stories. So he invites us, myself, my mutual friend, and another seminarian to dinner at the Duquesne Club. And so we're just talking with him back and forth. And even by this point, early on in my seminary time, I was the trolley and the train nut, and that kind of stuff. So my mutual acquaintances obviously know this, but Mr. Milburn does not. And so we're talking about, geez, Mr. Milburn, you've been in Pittsburgh since the 1920s. What has changed the most? What's the number one thing now that's different about Pittsburgh as it was back when you were growing up, back in your career? And without missing a beat, and this is no joke, without missing a beat, he goes, streetcars. There are no more streetcars here. And my friend looked at me like, did you set this man up? I got kicked in the shin by my acquaintance underneath the table, the Duquesne Club. I said, Rich, no, I said, I have never met this man before. We have not talked about streetcars at all. So that was my funny story about my one and only time. The number one question, the number one answer was there are no more streetcars. So this is from a World War II tank commander, vice president of global investments of Mellon Bank. And he must have been a streetcar man himself, and I just did not know that. So that's the Duquesne Club story.
I'm going to stop the share here so we can all see each other a little better. And George, I will get your video on. Sorry about that.
Okay, good.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments for Jack?
I have a question, maybe for cousin Bruce. The color of the orange color on the Iron City beer cans seems to be exactly the same as the low floor cars.
Orange? What, Iron City beer cans? They were
Yeah.
white with a red label.
No, it's I'm talking about
The new ones.
Oh, the new ones.
Yeah.
Okay. My shirt's sort of that color.
Pure coincidence.
Yeah, I would say probably.
I'd say if it's old froth and slosh beer, it might be more than a coincidence, but if it's Iron City now, maybe not.
Right. Yeah, maybe. If Cordic was still alive, I mean, there's a lot of possibilities there.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see some more of the comments from the chat. Mike Bukta says it's very neat to see the patent and wiring diagram for the control system with the 3 running points. And lots of positive feedback. So thank you so much, Jack.
Well, the PN Jones control was I've been told that they made a real distinctive sound going down the street because they kept switching the motors, which motor was on and off, and you know, but I don't know much more than that. Fred Schneider is an aficionado of the low floors, the very first low floors, and there were 4200s, and this is another thing I've been told. There were 4200 series cars that still had that control. They switched most of them over, but there were some 4200s in use into the 50s. And
do we still have it? Do we
Yeah,
have
go
a
ahead.
controller, an example of one in our collection?
Yeah,
I thought we did.
I think we do. I think they use some of those master controllers to run machines at home with.
I think so.
We got some oddball stuff like that there.
Yeah.
And well, the controller on our crane car is left over from that era.
I see.
And the master controller on 3700s, I think, were like that. The 4300s originally had that and got converted over to magnetic HL, like 3756 has.
I see.
So many of the 4350 series cars, like 4398, had HL control, like the ones that ran in Washington. But the ones that they high speeded had K controllers.
One of my reminiscences of low floor cars is about 1949, 1950, when I was a kid. This fellow who was a student at Arsenal School in Lawrenceville had his school picnic at Kennywood Park. So I was waiting on Butler Street at 40th, and 5 low floor cars showed up to take all these school kids to Kennywood Park. They didn't use a PCC car because they wanted to save their better cars for the regular riding public. So the school kids got to ride these old low floor cars all the way from Lawrenceville to downtown, out Forbes Street to Squirrel Hill, down over the Homestead High Level Bridge to Kennywood. I enjoyed that more than the rides at Kennywood Park.
Still, they were still doing that in the 1950s out of the Ingram car barn to Westview for the Kraft and Ingram school picnic at Westview. A bunch of low floor cars, no PCCs involved.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That, you know, and I know that is a story that that visitors would relate that came to the museum a long time ago when I was a young guy.
Bill Myers, what is that you're holding up?
You'll never guess.
Oh, it's an old Froggy Flush bottle. I can read the label. It's now there you go.
Oh yeah.
It's a team of Yeckberg cans. That's better.
Fantastic.
I found a whole nest of those cans in one of my boxes recently. The ones with her.
Well, they might be worth some money.
Yeah, the ones of her tied to the trolley.
They might be worth a couple of bucks.
Yeah, well, maybe we can use them to make some money for the museum. That would be the best thing to do.
I have a question for you, Jack. Being still kind of new to Pittsburgh, what they were called yellow cars, but they were orange, right? What's the deal with that? Or were they yellowish orange, or like what? I don't understand.
Well, okay. I know a story that I think is pretty accurate. The original paint that was on the cars was lacquer, and it was orange when it started out, but it faded in the sun over the years, and it came to look like yellow. Now, John Roos put in his little story that his mother talked about those old orange cars. Well, in later years, they painted them with enamel, which held up better. But I've seen black and white pictures that I think if you colorize them, the car would be more of a yellow orange rather than a little less of a red orange.
Yeah.
So that was the story. That was the story I was told about the paint. That it was I think Bob Brown. That was a Bob Brown story.
That makes sense.
Bob Brown, one of the founders, like Harry Bartley. Bill was talking about Harry Bartley. Member number 1, Bob Brown, member number 2, etc., and Reynolds Galbraith, number 3.
Well,
So
I'm
I
just
guess
looking.
Grandpa isn't here, I guess he didn't
Yeah.
sign up.
Well, I'm looking through the participant list and I see a brother clergyman, Father Scott, I believe. I don't recognize him. Is he there, Father Scott? Oh,
Yes, from Erie, Pennsylvania.
great. Which Catholic or Episcopal or Orthodox?
Jack, I used to go down to St. Mary's Seminary every year for retreat. I would see you down there a week after Thanksgiving.
Oh, great. Okay, great.
Okay.
I keep a nice picture of 2227 here. I'm at the controls about 18 years ago up at Trolleyville.
Oh, okay.
All one afternoon, we had one of their outings, and fond memories. And it's an absolute delight to know that there's one Cincinnati streetcar surviving, and that it's so nearby to where we live in Cincinnati. So thank you, everybody.
Yes.
It's really great.
And don't forget, we have a CN&C car too.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Which is
And
not as far along.
I was going to say, for anyone who's not been to the museum, your restoration skills are fantastic. I still think the journey that 832 has made, it's wonderful.
Yeah, and I want to shout out to everybody watching from near, but especially far. We have folks from all over the country tonight, and I also want to give a shout out to one of our members, George Chason, who's been putting together kind of a Zoom list of all the Zoom presentations that various organizations are doing and kind of compiling them all. So I think we have some people here tonight who found out about us from that list. So welcome everyone who hasn't been here before, and thanks for coming. Do we have any other questions or comments for Jack?
One compliment to add to everyone else. Thank you, Kristen. Well done and welcome aboard.
Thanks. Great. And
goodbye too.
oh, sorry. I'm still working on finding somebody to give a Cincinnati presentation. Eventually we will have one of those, hopefully in April or May, because I know a lot of folks with the CTHA do give great like Cincinnati Street Railway presentations and Green Line presentations, and that would tie into our collection. So I'm still on the hunt for a presentation about that. But yeah, I want to thank everybody again for coming tonight. And this presentation will be on YouTube within the next week or so, whenever I can get it edited and up on there. I shared a link in the chat if you want to watch previous Trolleyology presentations. I think there's 8 of them up there right now, everything from Johnstown to local things to one about Wexford Station, which is now at the museum. So you can watch all sorts of programs there, and we'll be adding to it if our presenters agree to have those on YouTube. Not all of them do want them on YouTube, but Jack has agreed that we can put his presentation on YouTube. So look out for that in the next few days. All right. Thank you, everybody, again for joining us. We hope to see you again in a couple weeks. Thanks so much for coming.
Hey,
Very
thank
much.
you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Good job.
Thanks
Jack.
for
Well
coming
done,
out.
Jack.
Bye.
Great job.
Thanks, Jack.
What are they used to saying, O'Brien and Gary? Goodbye, goodbye.